Oli Soutar is our grants manager at the Dunhill Medical Trust, and I'll hand over to him and he can carry on.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sanjay. And yeah, hello everyone. Thanks so much for being here. Thank you to the BGS in particular for having us. It's really nice to be here. As Sanjay said, I'm one of the grants managers at the Dunhill Medical Trust, and I'm going to be focusing, I guess, today on the various ways that we're trying to build and sustain capacity in aging-related research. So hopefully it'll be a bit of a smorgasbord of different opportunities that I'm going to sort of present to you. There should be plenty of time for questions at the end, and we also have a stand in the main lobby as well. So I think there's a final coffee break afterwards, so if there's any further questions, feel free to come and have a chat with us. I guess before I sort of get into it proper, I should probably give you a bit of a background to who we are. I guess out of interest, who in the room, sorry to anyone online, I can't see your hands, but who in the room, just with a show of hands, is sort of vaguely aware or fairly well aware of what we do, maybe has worked with us in the past? A smatter, maybe half, maybe a bit less than half, so that's great. So the intro is not totally wasted. So I'll give you a bit of a background. I'll try and keep it quite brief, but it's always helpful. So we're the Dunhill Medical Trust. We are a charitable funder, and our primary focus is on research into healthy aging, so the underpinning mechanisms of aging and age-related diseases, the care and health and social care of older people, and sort of healthy aging broadly. So that spans everything from sort of basic science to implementation science, social sciences, everything in between. And we also, to a lesser extent, provide funding to community organisations who support older people as well. So we're quite unique in that we are both a research funder and a funder of community organisations, and sometimes we try and bring those two arms together. And we give out about £5 million a year, so we're fairly small as sort of research funders go, but we're probably the only one in the UK that funds specifically ageing-related research. And everything that we do is funded by our lovely strategic framework, which we launched at the end of 2020, and it runs until 2025. So we're sort of just over the halfway point. So I thought I might quickly run you through that a little bit. So one of the things the framework does, is outlines our research priorities for the period. They are outlined here in this box. I'm not going to run through them all, you can read them there, but if you have followed any of our work, you'll have seen that some of our recent funding calls have been targeting specific topics that are listed here. So we have a current funding call which is around addressing age-related issues of hearing and vision, which is one of the priorities listed here. So everything that we do is sort of typically focused around one or more of those research areas. The other thing that the framework does is, I guess, outline a few key aims that we want to achieve. And the first one of those, which is probably most relevant to this talk today, is around enabling academic researchers and health and social care professionals to improve the quality of life of older people effectively. And that could be now, or it could be the context of change in the future. And then we try and highlight a few ways that we're going to go about that. And I've just bolded here a few ones that I think are most relevant. So obviously backing well-designed research, providing support for doctoral and postdoctoral level researchers. And we've got a focus here. You'll see this sort of second from bottom one also mentions health and social care professionals. So we have a focus on clinical research sort of running all the way through the strategy. And convening networks and organising events, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. And then finally, the sort of final thing that the framework does is outlines our key principles for research. There's a lot of text on this slide. You don't need to read it, but I guess there's three that are most important in terms of the work that we fund. So we expect the active engagement and involvement of older people in all the research that we fund. We want applicants and the people that we work with to be considering equity, diversity and inclusion, EDI, in the context of the work that they're doing in a meaningful way. And we expect work to be taking a multidisciplinary approach where that's relevant, and I think normally most of the stuff we do, it is relevant. And then there's two more principles that are perhaps more relevant to what we do personally. So making connections and convening networks, again I'll come on to that in a bit. And we're in a fairly fortunate position, I guess, that we can be flexible when it's needed. And I think COVID was a good example of that, but there's other examples as well of when our position as a foundation allows us to maybe have a bit more flex that other organisations don't. So that's the framework, that's the strategy. So I guess now moving on to how we put that in practice and how do we actually see ourselves as supporting research capacity in this area. I guess the most obvious one is funding research. This slide, I guess, gives you a bit of an outline of the various types of funding that we offer, and I think the sort of headline message is we're fairly small, but we try and provide a variety of funding opportunities which touch on different topics and different career stages. So overall, our framework sees us taking a sort of thematic approach to funding. So typically, once a year, we have a large themed call, which is themed around one or more of those topics that were in the framework. And what's, I guess, fairly unique about these themed calls is that we offer flexibility in the type of funding that can be applied for. So there's typically about £2 million budget overall. And you could apply for seed funding, it could be project grant funding, it might be a PhD studentship, it might be a postdoc fellowship, etc. So the focus is on the topic, and then we give you flexibility as to how you go about trying to answer the questions that you want to answer. So I said that they tend to be annual, so our next theme call is likely to open summer next year. So keep your eyes peeled. It will be broadly around one of those topics in the framework, but we're yet to sort of define exactly what that will be. And then as well as the themed calls, we offer a number of studentships and fellowships. So these are more targeted at different career stages. These are more career stage specific. Hopefully some of you will be aware that we offer a co-funded fellowship with the BGS. And given where we are today, I'm going to go into a bit more detail on that later. So we'll park it for now. And then I've just highlighted again in bold a few more opportunities that I think might be of interest today. So we have a scheme called a proleptic postdoctoral fellowship scheme. This, I think, is fairly unique in the way that it's structured. It's targeted at senior postdoctoral researchers who don't currently have a permanent position. And the way it's funded is it's a co-funded, tapered approach. So it's co-funded with the host institution, and it's tapered. So the idea is that our funding tapers down over the fellowship period, and the institution's funding tapers up. And the agreement is that, subject to conditions, the fellow gets a permanent position at the end of the fellowship. So we see it as quite important in filling that, what I guess is sometimes called a valley of death, in that the real lack of sort of opportunities for permanent academic positions. Again, the next round of that is due to open 2024, probably springtime. We piloted it a few years ago, and we're going to be running it again next year, so keep your eyes peeled. And finally, a little sneak peek of a new scheme that we haven't run before, which is an early career postdoctoral fellowship scheme. So hopefully what you'll see is that we're trying to get an overlap between the different funding schemes that we're offering. So think of that one as a kind of maybe my first postdoctoral fellowship scheme. So again, we're hoping that will be opening sort of spring, summer next year. It's going to be a pilot, so there might be certain restrictions around who can apply, but we'll be providing all the details in due course. And all of the details about our sort of open or upcoming funding calls go onto our apply for funding page, and we've got a very small link at the bottom of the slide, so if you want to come back to them and look, you can. We don't just, though, see ourselves as an organisation that provides funding for research. I mentioned earlier that one of our key principles is around convening networks. So with that in mind, I wanted to talk a little bit about something that we launched quite recently. We launched it in, I think it was March, Sanjay? March? Called the DMT Academy. And this, we hope, is going to become a sort of inclusive network of ageing-related researchers and community organisations who are either research-ready or interested in engaging with the evidence base a bit more. We just, I think, passed 200 members. I think I saw on Twitter. We're continuing to grow all the time. So if you aren't currently a member, would strongly encourage you to do so. You don't have to have received funding from us previously. It's very easy to join. It's quick, it's easy, it's free. The link, again, is at the bottom of these slides. By joining, effectively, you are adding your public profile to the members directory. That's then a sort of searchable portal where you can search for collaborators. You can indicate if you're looking for a mentor or if you're happy to be a mentor. So we want it to be, a really sort of useful space to find other people to work with. And also, as an Academy member, you get access to sort of member-specific training, events, and other opportunities. One opportunity that hopefully will be of interest is the Excellence Awards. So we launched the current round, the first round, in September of this year in memory of Professor Stuart Parker. Hopefully, I think he'll be known to some people in the BGS, a really valued member of our board member and research grants committee who sadly passed away early this year, and he was a real proponent of the gerontological lens in research, as he used to call it, which is a phrase that we now use a lot, thanks to him. So really nice that we can make the first awards in his honour. These awards are designed to celebrate achievement in ageing-related research, and also to identify people who've really embodied our principles for research in the work that they do. And there's 2 awards on offer. There's a Rising Star and a Senior Leader. And the winners will receive £120,000 of flexible funding over 3 years. The current round has just closed. We're hoping to make the announcements of the winners in spring next year. But this is going to be an annual prize, so the next round should be opening probably around September next year. So do take a look out for that, and if there's someone in mind, you can either nominate yourself or you can nominate another Academy member. So if there's someone you've got to keep in mind, we think it's a really great opportunity to get what is increasingly hard to get, which is sort of flexible funding for ageing-related research activities. Another opportunity that hopefully will be of interest is the ability to register your interest to be an observer at one of our research grants committee meetings to get an insight into how funding decisions are made and how applications are assessed. So this is open to anyone who is a member of the Academy who's an early career researcher. You'll be treated very much like an expert panel member, in that you'll get access to the paperwork before the meeting. You'll get a briefing chat with us, which is always a delight. We'll run you through how it's all going to work, and then you'll come into the discussion of applications. You won't take part in the funding decisions, but you'll be able to sit in and see the sort of mechanisms of how it works. So we think it's a really great opportunity. It is limited, spaces are limited. We can probably do 1 or 2 at each research grants committee meeting where applications are being discussed, and it's being allocated on a first come first served basis. So if you or anyone you know is interested, then I would advise you to become an Academy member and register your interest as soon as possible. And you can do that on we've got a short sort of smart survey link, and the link is at the bottom of these slides, or come and find us afterwards if you're desperate to do it now. Finally, I should just say that the Academy is very ably guided by a really great steering committee. I've got the names here because I think some of them will be familiar to you as BGS members. We do actually have one position which is reserved for a BGS representative, which is currently Mary Nee Loughlin at King's College London. And the plan is that there will be rolling opportunities to become a part of the steering committee. So again, it's another opportunity to join in and to have a real opportunity to contribute to the development and direction of the Academy. You know, ultimately, the Academy will be defined by its members. The more people that are involved and are engaged, the more helpful we hope it will be. So if you have any ideas for what you would like it to look like, then the email address is there, and our colleague Sarah will be really happy to hear any sort of ideas that you have. So we are at the BGS meeting, so again, it seems only right to spend a bit of time talking about our joint fellowship with the BGS. A really brilliant scheme that we're really glad to be a part of and that we've been running for a number of years now. So the key aim of this scheme is to support frontline healthcare professionals who have an interest in a career in ageing-related research to undertake a PhD. We've been running it since 2019, and we have 5 brilliant fellows who are underway currently at various stages of their PhD. They're all up here. I haven't seen any of them sneaking around. Maybe they're trying to avoid us, but if you see any of them over the next couple of days, I don't think they are trying to avoid us. They're all lovely people. But if you see any of them, do go and say hi. I guess we see this as a really sort of key pillar in our support for clinical research careers. Like I said, we've been running it for a number of years, and it's a really key relationship that we have. So I guess with that in mind, it's great that today we can announce the next round of the scheme, which is going to be opening in actually just a few weeks' time. I'll come on to the timetable in just a second. All of this information is actually already up on our website, but I thought I'd just run through it today in case it's of interest. In terms of what we're looking to fund, so there's going to be one jointly funded fellowship on offer. The research must be focused around understanding and treating age-related diseases and frailty, or improving the health and social care of older people. And we have a particular emphasis on projects which address one or more of those key themes that I outlined earlier. And ideally, we're also looking for research that has the potential to impact the health and social care of older people in the sort of short to medium term. And fellowships can be undertaken on either a full-time or a part-time basis. So up to 3 years if it's full-time, up to 6 years if it's part-time. So there's a bit of flexibility there. In terms of who can apply, as I said, this is open to all frontline healthcare professionals working with older people. So that includes allied healthcare professionals, doctors, nurses, etc., everything in between. You would need to be based at a UK university or an NHS trust. And you need to apply alongside a primary supervisor, and then you can have up to 2 further co-supervisors. And you can have other collaborators as well. I'll talk a little bit more about team members a bit later on, but we're open to having other collaborators as well. And the successful candidate would need to be a member of the BGS for the duration of the fellowship, but I think I'm probably preaching to the converted, given where we are today. So we all know the benefits that brings. How much is available is always the key question. People want to know how much money is on the table. So you can apply for up to 300,000, and we also welcome applications that include part funding or in-kind support. So that could be from the university, or it could be from other pots. And sort of generally, the award is expected to cover the fellow's salary. So we fund the clinical salary. It's not a stipend. And tuition fees, and then additional research costs. And the guidelines, when they come out, which should be in a few weeks' time, they have the full details of what are all the eligible costs. I guess while I'm here, it's a good opportunity to just say, be realistic with your costs. So value for money is one of the considerations when applications are assessed. Value for money does not always mean it has to be as cheap as possible. This is, in particular, I guess, for this scheme, this is a training scheme. So, if we're supportive, and we're very supportive, in fact, of people including things like training costs, career development costs, as long as they can make the case for them being justified and relevant to the work that needs to be done. And that's a sort of a comment that sometimes comes out from the panel with certain applications to the scheme. In terms of the timetable, so this should be opening in mid-December. I think we're aiming for the 11th of December, but I didn't quite dare put the exact date just in case it slightly changes between now and then. But it'll be opening in mid-December, closing in mid-March 2024. So we're trying to give people a long window to apply for. It will go over the Christmas break, but hopefully that's long enough that you can put it to bed over Christmas and come back to it in the new year. Once the applications are in, they'll go through an initial check. They'll then be sent for external peer review, and they'll then go to the expert panel, and who exactly that is will be in the guidelines. I guess I should take the opportunity now to just say the panel is always excellent, and we are incredibly grateful to people, peer reviewers and panel reviewers, who spend a lot of time and a lot of effort making sure that every application gets the sort of due care and attention that it deserves. And I'd like to think that anyone who's applied to the scheme, regardless of what the outcome was, would say that the feedback that they got is sort of really helpful to them in helping them to develop that proposal further. So that will take place over a number of months, and then the applications will be shortlisted. And if you're shortlisted, you'll be interviewed, and that typically happens in mid to late September next year. We'll obviously confirm the dates nearer the time, or hopefully have them confirmed by the time that the scheme is open. The panel will then make a recommendation as to who is funded, and that will then go to our Research Grants Committee meeting for ratification in October. There's then a few things that need to happen to get all of that approved. So typically we tend to say that candidates will be notified of the outcome by mid-November next year. And it's a question that sometimes comes to us, I think, actually, is how quickly do I need to get started if I get funded, how quickly do I need to get started? We're quite flexible about that, so we don't have a sort of set, you don't need to get started within X number of months necessarily. Typically, we say within 12 months, but there's some flexibility there. And then typically the award will be announced either at the BGS autumn meeting next year or the spring meeting in 2025, depending on when everything is sort of signed off. So I have to say the BGS incredibly organised that they've got the dates for the autumn meeting next year already on the website, so I could find them, possibly TBC, but they seem pretty confirmed. They aren't quite organised, they haven't quite got the spring 2025 dates yet, but I think we'll probably let them off the hook for that one. So that's the sort of scheme, that's a bit of an overview. I thought it might be helpful to end with a few funding myths and top tips, and I think these are sort of relevant to all of the work that we fund in a way, but particularly trying to pick out some which are relevant to this scheme. So the first one, myth number one, grant applications are a lottery. Not true. If you read the documentation or you read the news article for a funding scheme and it says, the success rate is 20%, please don't think that means I can just submit 5 applications to this scheme or similar schemes and one of them will get funded. Sometimes it feels like that's what's being done, but it's obvious when something hasn't been tailored to the scheme. So it's much better to read the documentation carefully, pick the schemes that are really relevant to what you're looking to do and make sure that you tailor the application. And for us, and for the BGS, obviously, that means in particular making sure that there's a real focus on ageing and the health and social care of older people. So as Stuart Parker would have said, apply the gerontological lens to your proposal. If you don't, then it will get picked up on. Myth number 2, if I put a well-known and eminent name on my grant, it has more chance of it being funded. I would say it depends. Your proposal will be evaluated on its merits, so if that individual has a real unique role and you can demonstrate what their specific role is and why they're part of the team, then that's great. But actually what we're really looking for is, regardless of who's involved, we want to see it's a real sort of clarity on why they're involved, what they're bringing to the team, what their skills are, and what their role or responsibility will be during the grant. Myth number 3, this is a bit of a silly one, but it actually does come up quite a lot, which is I have to give my project a fancy acronym. I would say, again, it depends. So I've seen some very good project acronyms, and if they're done well, they can be really great in terms of communication activities and sort of distilling what the grant is into sort of a quite snappy title. Sometimes it feels like people have put a lot of effort into trying to condense their long title into a sort of acronym, and it's just become quite convoluted and probably a waste of time. So if you find that you're spending as much time trying to get an acronym for your project as you are writing the application, you're probably going down the wrong path. So we would prefer that the focus is on the content. We don't mind a long title, that's fine. And I think this is the final myth, which is nobody really looks at the principles-based sections of an application. At the end of the day, the funder just cares about whether the research is any good. I would say for us, definitely not true. So for us at the Trust, those sections of your application are really key. So things like patient care and public involvement, equity, diversity, inclusion, career development and capacity building, those things are key to us. If you apply to a 2-stage funding call, so something like one of our large, the themed calls that I mentioned earlier, at the first stage, our assessment of your application is primarily principles-based, so you won't get through to the second stage unless those things are really solid, and we will give you feedback about it probably if you get through to the next stage as well. And even if you're applying to a more of a 1-stage funding call, so the Joint Fellowship, for example, those sections are reviewed by the Research Grants Committee or the panel, regardless of what call you're applying for. And I think it's worth pointing out, I mentioned it earlier around training costs, that we are always supportive of you including costs related to those sort of activities in your budget, as long as you can justify them and show why they're relevant. I think sometimes people are almost a bit scared to put costs in that they think aren't about the sort of key research activities, but actually we do consider that a key research activity. So if you can justify it, then put it in your budget, for sure. And then finally, funding tips. So our research grants committee have put together their sort of top 10 tips on writing a good application. It's all up on our website, so I won't go through these in detail, but there's a few that I've picked out that I think are particularly relevant to the fellowship scheme. This first one, number 2, is quite self-explanatory, but it's sort of surprising how often it happens. You have to make it really clear what gap your project is trying to fill. So remember that sometimes if you're writing it, you know why it's important, but you have to really articulate why that work is important to someone who maybe doesn't know the work so well. So tell us what the gap in the literature is and how you intend to fill it. Number 4, the impact section is very important, and that's particularly the case, as I said, for the joint fellowship scheme. We totally understand that at the start of a project grant or when you're writing your fellowship application, it's impossible to completely predict what the outcomes are going to be and what the impacts are going to be. But we do want to see that you have an idea of what you want to achieve and how you would go about doing that, and that your plans are credible and you have the sort of relationships in place that you need to make that happen. Number 5, this is a key one. I would say 99% of the time, one of the things that gets picked up on when proposals are reviewed is analytical plans, and in particular the sample size or the power calculations. So do make sure that those are absolutely rock solid. In particular, we tend to have people on the panel who are really hot on sample size calculations, so it will get picked up on, and we do actually provide a lot of space for you to sort of outline them properly. So take the opportunity to do that. Make sure that what you plan to do is feasible. I think that's particularly important for a PhD fellowship. Obviously, we want you to try and be ambitious, but actually, it is important to evidence the fact that the work you're trying to do is feasible, and to sort of provide the rationale that it will be feasible, and that what you're saying you can do is doable in the time frame and with the resources that you have available. Number 7, this goes back to something I mentioned earlier. So obviously any research that involves human participants, and I think that probably incorporates all sort of clinical research, make sure you have clear plans for public involvement at various stages of the research. I think sometimes what we're looking for is real sort of specificity as to how PPI will be involved in the research at various stages. I guess a tip from us would be the UK standards for public involvement. If you aren't aware of those, they can provide quite a helpful framework for how you can sort of couch that answer in terms of how PPI will be used at each stage of the project. And finally, don't be shy, in particular for a fellowship application. The person is as important as the project and the place. So I think we often say when we talk about fellowship applications, person, place, project. That's what we're sort of looking for. So this is really your chance to show off your achievements and what you're capable of. I think a comment that comes up quite frequently from the panel with the fellowship scheme is that it's sometimes unclear to what extent the work is being led by the fellow, or they have sort of led in the development of the research proposal. So this is really your opportunity to make that clear and to show that this is your work as much as that of your supervisory team. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of various things that we're offering. Hopefully it was helpful. Like I said, thank you very much for joining us. We've got various contact details here. We're always happy to answer emails. We're a very small team. Me and Sanjay are 2/3 of the grants team. We've left Gordon at home manning the ship. So email us on grants@dunhillmedical.org.uk and one of us will pick it up. Like I said, we have a stand outside if you want to come and have further conversations with us. We've got our newsletter. We send out details of upcoming calls, open calls, other news that you might be interested in. And like I said, please do consider joining the Academy. Thank you very much. I think we've got lots of time for questions. If there are any, I'll leave it there.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. Well, thank you very much, Oli. And while people are thinking of questions, so I hope that presentation gives a bit of a flavour of how the Trust is committed to supporting academic and clinical research into healthy ageing. And I hope that you found that the session provided a good overview of the Trust support and capacity building in this area. So do we have any questions from the room? I'll have a look online as well. Give me a second. So I guess I'll start off. So how can, say, you mentioned briefly about independence of the applicant. How can someone articulate with an application form their independence or their ownership of the project?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the first thing to say is that we provide, for the fellowship scheme, we provide a specific space for that in the application. So there is an opportunity to sort of really make that clear. I think there's a few things. One of them comes down to language. I think I've seen maybe applications in the past that this is a fellowship application, so really you should be sort of owning the work. I've seen applications in the past that use the word sort of we a lot, and it talks about the sort of team, and actually that sometimes gives the indication that perhaps this isn't the fellows' work necessarily. This might be work that's come from the sort of supervisory team that they are then kind of taking on. So I think sometimes we're a bit scared of taking credit for stuff, but actually in a fellowship application, I think it's fine to say, I will be leading on this, I'll be doing these bits. Obviously, we don't expect that the fellow will be leading on absolutely everything. This is a PhD fellowship, it's very early career, but we want to see that kind of leadership up front. Obviously, if the candidate has been involved in sort of work in the past that sort of flows into the proposal, then that's a really good way of evidencing that this is a sort of a track that they're sort of following on from. So I would say that those are sort of two key ways, things that we can look out for.
Oh, no, that's really helpful, thank you. And Miles?
Thanks very much for that, Oli. Miles Whittam. So in my role that I've just taken up as Vice President for Research within BGS, I think the first thing I want to say is thank you for being partners with us in these endeavours, because I think they're absolutely critical, and there are so few opportunities where ageing is front and centre in terms of research funding, that these are exceptionally valuable opportunities, and they're really great training opportunities. So I suppose and this is more a comment than a question, I'm afraid, but I wanted to put my tuppence worth in there, because otherwise Sarah will shoot me for not doing my job properly. But it's to say, I think we're all really keen to see lots of applications, and particularly to see applications from perhaps places that have not put in many applications in the past, and you'll see that there are some centres that tend to come up in conversation, and we perhaps don't see so many applications from others. Now, clearly, if you don't put in an application, you are not going to be successful. So if you are even half thinking of it, go for it, because there is an opportunity there, and they're not all going to go to Oxford or Cambridge or Nottingham or wherever. I think the other thing to say about it, though, is if you are in that position, partner with people who do have experience and do have the expertise to help you with this. You are not expected to do this from scratch with no support. There are plenty of people around, particularly in your local academic centres, who can give you the mentorship and support that you need. And I suppose the thing to remember is the P's, the rule of P's, when you're thinking about this. Fellowships are all about the person. They're also about the place, and to a lesser extent, they're about the project. The project is important, but it is not the central thing. A fellowship is all about funding you as an individual, so it's about you. The fourth P that seems to have been added to this sort of old adage recently is the plan. Funders love to see long-term impact of their funding decisions. So if you can make the case as to why funding you now is going to turn you into an old buffer professor in 30 years' time or 20 years' time, that's great, because it's that building the long-term capacity that's important. And so in order to get all of those components in place, partnering with people who are experts in the field, but also have got the ability to support you as an individual in your career growth is really important. So go and have early conversations with people in your local academic centre.
Thank you very much. No, great. Anything you'd like to add there, Oli?
No, I don't. Well, I guess only to say that absolutely agree around, make sure that you have the connections in place to help you develop your proposal. And I think one of the reasons that we've tried, sort of every time we run the scheme, we try and extend the sort of deadline a little bit longer. And I know, I'm exactly the same. people tend to end up doing things very close to the deadline, and I'm guilty of that as well. But actually, hopefully, by giving people a long stretch, it means that, if you're someone who, maybe this might be your first time writing a sort of fellowship application, it means that there is the time to hopefully get those connections and find the support that will help you, really hone a great proposal.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions? Oh, yeah. Sarah.
Sarah Mystery, Chief Executive, BGS. I wondered if you could say a bit about your perception as a relatively small but nimble funder about the ecosystem of research in ageing. Where do you see the gaps, the areas where you or perhaps others can nip in? Where do you see the bigger structures of research funding not really covering the terrain?
Gosh, never been called nimble before. Sanjay, I might defer to you only because you've been involved in, obviously, the CMO report, which came out quite recently, which might be quite relevant.
Yeah, so actually I was going to put Oli on the spot and actually ask him about the Chief Medical Officer's report, so he's thrown it right back at me. So we recently contributed, as many other organisations and people did, to the Chief Medical Officer's report, which focused on health in an ageing society. And it's quite interesting where Oli had put up in one of the earlier slides our priority areas around the mechanisms of ageing, the social determinants of healthy older age, the suitable living environments. And when we think back to the work that we did back then, or I would say the organisation did back then, effectively that was around 2019, 2020, so it was launched in 2020. And when we look at the Chief Medical Officer's report, quite a lot of the same themes are there. So in a way it's good that we're on the right track, and I guess there has been a lot happening since 2020, which means that quite a lot of those issues still haven't been addressed. So really, when we think about being nimble and fleet of foot, we're able to provide support in areas where gaps have been outlined, but actually those gaps still seem to be the ones that we had identified back in 2019, 2020. So definitely suitable living environments, the design of solutions and tangible products that can help with older people and their independence. So it's quite interesting. It's a very nice question, and so I think I'm saying that effectively we're on the right track with the areas that we're looking at currently. So thank you. I guess I've got a question that leads on from what Miles was talking about, the plan, and that there's often a word used, impact. What's the impact of the work that takes place? And so how do you think that the applicants could best articulate their plan or impact in the future?
Yeah, it's again, it's a good question. I guess it's hard to go into too much specifics because what exactly impact will look like is completely dependent on what the project is. I think the key thing probably for us is that the plans need to be credible. I would say we see quite a lot of applications where there's quite a lot of very bold statements, and bold ambition is great, but it's not always backed up with sort of credible plans to achieve it. So, I think sometimes maybe people think that as a funder we need to we will only fund it if it's sort of said that there'll be sort of immediate international impact. Actually, that's not necessarily the case. We try often in documentation and when we do things like this to make the case that actually it might be local impact, it might be regional impact, it might be international impact, and actually it might be on all three of those levels, and that they might be at sort of different timescales. And actually I think a good way to probably structure a question, an answer around that is to sort of think about those three levels and what you might be hoping to achieve and what the sort of timescales might be. And like I said, I think because it's, we know that plans don't always turn into reality, and sometimes things can come up that were never expected at the start. But actually, I think showing that you have the relationships in place to make those plans a reality, or at least have a plan to make those relationships a reality, is probably the key thing for us. So it doesn't have to be immediate international impact. Actually, if it's smaller scale and credible and feels like it will happen, then that's also great.
Thank you very much. And just to remind everyone who's watching online that I am doing my very best to monitor the questions that are coming online. You're making this very easy for me because nothing's coming online. So I am watching and I am clicking. So if it does look like I'm looking down, I'm hoping to see if there's a question out there. I guess linked to what you just said there about having maybe the right connections as well. What if I'm not the greatest at statistics? I can't even say it properly. Statistics, sample size calculations. What can I do then?
I would say links very closely to what Miles said. Find people that can support you. I mean, statistics is that's a field that people spend 50 years specialising in, and it's probably not my cup of tea either. But actually, I'm sure those people are very popular because, like I said, it's always something that gets picked up on. It's always something that has to be rock solid if you sort of want your proposal to go places. So. I think most institutions will have a sort of statistics department or some form of support around that. It might be, your sort of clinical trials team. I don't know where it would be, but find those people that can help you and articulate in your proposal that you have sought them out and engaged with them, and ideally, bring them in as might not be a co-applicant, but it might be a sort of collaborator who's going to provide that sort of ad hoc advice. And if they can, provide a sort of letter of support which says, yes, I'm going to provide this support, then that really goes back to this idea of credibility, that then gives some credibility to what you're saying and demonstrates that you've got the experience on board.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions from the room? Okay, well, I think we can bring time with this. May we put our hands together again for Oli?
Thanks so much.